If you are perfect, you've probably gone too far. It's probably a sign that you've done something wrong because you've probably omitted something else. And that perfectness is momentary.
What are some of those kind of ubiquitous truths at companies that are growing at this clip at this stage that you typically see?
It's not simple, but it's back to basics. You think about every sports movie out there, right? It's about the fundamentals. It's about the plays.
In the simplest terms, what do you think should be on exec roll-up dashboard?
Number one on there is going to be the pipeline health. I think pipeline health is the one thing in a company everybody can rally around. Every single department in an organization can impact pipeline.
This Four Horsemen of Notre Dame analogy, they were all, fairly interchangeable. And that goes back to this concept of sort of a generalist specialist. How can we empower our teams to start thinking more that way?
Whenever I meet a team or bring somebody on, my mantra and what I will always talk about is that I want everyone to dedicate 25 to 30% of their time, which is an awful loud amount of time, to focus on things that nobody else is asking for.
Behind the scenes, it was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened.
This episode is brought to you by Demandbase. Demandbase helps B2B companies hit their revenue goals using fewer resources by using the power of AI to identify and engage the accounts and buying groups most likely to purchase. Their account-based technology unites sales and marketing teams around insights that you can understand and facilitates quick actions across systems and channels to deliver big wins. It's flexible, scalable ABM built for you.
Hello and welcome back to the GTM podcast, hanging with Scott Barker. Thanks as always for lending us your eardrums. We're bringing some Monday energy today. We're recording this on a Monday, but it is a sunny Monday. And my guest is down in Mexico. So Monday with the twist vibes, I think, better than most Mondays. I'm joined by Noah Marks. Noah, welcome, man.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Excited to have you. And we've been trying to get this on the books for a little while. Finally, we made it happen, but you've been a busy man.
Yeah, glad to finally have made it on. Let's put it that way.
Totally. You've been over the pond. You were in London, I believe, Galway, and now you're down at President's Club in Cabo. How's President's Club going?
Oh, it's incredible. So one of the reasons why I'm down here is because an opportunity to check in. I'm beginning my fourth week, so I certainly did not earn my way to this trip. But having some of the best and brightest folks that hit their number last year, or exceeded, or were excellent in some way, and having the chance to just sit down in person for a couple of days and pick their mind is so invaluable. As we chatted about, my last company I joined during COVID, and it's difficult when you can't establish those relationships or have to do everything over, Zoom or something like that. So real thankful to be able to have these in-person conversations.
Yeah, that's huge. And so timely on your fourth week. I couldn't imagine a better use of time than chopping it up with kind of the top 1% of the org. But yeah, I guess that leads nicely into kind of your background. I'll tee it up for those listeners. So Noah spent almost 4 years at Udemy, online education marketplace. Most of us have heard of it. Great company. As the VP of go-to-market strategy and operation. And now his current role, 4 weeks into it, at Diligent as the SVP and head of commercial strategy and ops. And really your entire career has been spent on building strategy, focused on building go-to-market engines, scaling organizations, really for sustainable growth. And that skill in this environment is definitely one that is needed. And yeah, you've held strategy and ops roles really for the last decade, beyond the ones I already mentioned, but with Walkme, Okta, Salesforce, incredible companies. You've been damn good at picking companies as well. And almost the entirety of your career has kind of been in this B2B tech market with the lone exception of this deviation into M&A, investment bank, which I'm interested in hearing a little bit about. But outside of that, reside in the Bay with your wife, 3 kids, 3 dogs. That's a lot of energy in that household, I imagine. And love to spend time fishing, hiking, skiing, all the amazing things you can do out west. But anything I missed there? Anything else you'd highlight?
That's about it. Somebody brought up to me the other day that this is my 4th career, which which I hadn't really appreciated as much, because there was a conversation about how do you kind of get to do the things that I'm doing, or what's the career path, and I struggle with this with a lot of my peers of that advice. But I started off in sales, got into marketing, and then did the focus in finance, and then found my way in this 4th section of my career. And I think all the experience leading up to it is really valuable, and I don't think I could have been as um, um, I don't think I could have executed as well or been as thoughtful about things, or had the breadth of experience to draw from without that background. So it served me well, yeah, in this type of role.
Yeah, it's so, again, invaluable to see things from a sales lens, a marketing lens, finance, now pulling it all together with this kind of operational expertise. I guess before we dive into this idea of a generalist specialist, because that's kind of what I want to talk to you about, because it seems like you've kind of carried that in your career, being able to specialize in certain things, but having a wide enough breadth of experience to see kind of the whole picture. Before we get there, I think it's very unique that we have someone on the pod who just started a new role. For executives that are on this podcast listening, how have you thought about kind of setting yourself up for success in this new role? I know we've talked about one, which is getting in person as soon as you can, meeting people in the trenches. How else have you kind of prepared yourself for success?
So, yeah, it's a good question. There's an element of um, every organization that's, yeah, mid-sized growth tech organization, for example, is having the same conversation at the exact same moment. It's crazy when I talk to my peers, or reach out and just chat with other organizations over the past year or so, particularly with the change in dynamic of the economy. Everybody seems to be having very similar conversations and very similar challenges and pains. And so what I try to do is look out for what are those internal challenges, because most of the organizations that I'm talking to, that our friends are with, there isn't an issue around the addressable market. Like, that is one of those things where you do the ROI and it's actually in the millions and it looks fake because it's just so big. But that's the reality, is that there is so much interesting opportunity out there. The challenge is so much so, how do you do that at scale? How do you pick your priorities? How do you line organizations together? And so what I've tried to do is bring those concepts of what I know are by default. I'm waiting for somebody to describe this sort of pain that I'm anticipating. And certainly it varies from company to company, but then trying to really tie it all together. So there's this definite butterfly effect, and this element around the alignment of an organization, that's really what I try to tinker into. So whether it's leading questions into various folks, but just trying to understand how they operate. How do they make decisions? Where is the information scaling all through to an individual on the front lines as it is to the CEO's office? Those are the type of things I try to look for. So it's the usual suspects that are the things that hold companies back internally, not necessarily whether or not it's the customer. And everyone's talking about the market's changed. Pipeline, inbound pipeline is a different thing. People are buying, people are investigating things differently and researching things differently. That is okay. The organizations have to adjust. And frankly, I think organizations got really lazy over the last 10 years and didn't really innovate in the way they reached out to customers. But I think from that perspective, there's an element of um, how do you look at all of that across the board and understand, is there something that we can be doing differently? Are we messaging to the customer? Do we really know what our customer is doing? All those things that you just get busy doing your own job. and you don't have the ability, or not maliciously, but you just get really focused, and you have quotas to meet, you have promises you need to keep. And then it's the element of like, are we, do we have our head up enough? Are we kind of looking around? So that's one of the areas that I try to focus on really early on. You can get into that when you start digging into pipeline, forecast, retention, all those sort of elements about how those organizations work together, and kind of see those connecting dots. Um, and diligent as like any other, is like there's so much opportunity. And then everyone, like, what does the go to market look like from 2024 forward? Because I think what the market looked like going into COVID is very, very different, not better or worse, just different. And I think that it's causing everyone to up their game, which is really exciting. And I think it's going to be a true benefit to the buyers out there, the audiences, the folks who consume technology. I think you've gotten the short end of the stick for many years. And I think that we're cresting on the time where I think there's going to be some really valuable insights that are going to give you answers than just a wall of data, which I feel like most organizations have done so far to date.
Definitely feels like 2024 would be kind of the year the power shifts to the buyer in a very meaningful way. They're demanding more innovation, they're demanding, better prices, they're demanding better communication, they're demanding more self-serve options, which again are all healthy trends. But yeah, what I'm hearing from you is kind of like you're diving in and really getting to know the diligent business, but you're also bringing with you sort of these ubiquitous truths that are happening across any company typically that's at this stage, and you're able to make some guesses on where you need to really dive in further. What are some of those kind of ubiquitous truths at companies that are growing at this clip at this stage that you typically see?
Yeah. So one of the ones I mentioned was, and it's almost like a back to basics. In fact, I've said that word so many times over the last 10 years that I feel like I'm underselling it, or like it's not simple, but it's back to basics. You think about every sports movie out there, right? It's about the fundamentals. It's about the plays. A story that I kind of go back to, and this is something that's kind of steered the way I've thought about things, which is the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame. It's something that I picked up during my Salesforce days, but it's the 1920s. Newt Rockne, he had a team. He had four players: a quarterback, a running back, and I think two fullbacks. Like nobody threw the ball, and they played both sides of the line. And those players were interchangeable. They knew what was happening with their other teammates in any given play. And so even though they weren't the fastest, they weren't the strongest, they weren't the biggest, but they could adapt quickly. And by knowing and depending on where other folks in the organization were, they were able to make those shifts and be able to go. I think they were undefeated except for one game in 4 years, which is incredible. But that's it. Each one could be placed into the other's position, and they would understand fundamentally what they're doing, understand what their role is, what they need to do to make the team successful. And that's carried it with me for so long. And so I've attributed that back to kind of how I think about pipeline health, which is certainly one of, that's a challenge for everybody, because I think people were just depending on leads coming in, and everyone's had these great models of just like, yeah, people are going to come in and they have an order form, and I have my clipboard out ready to take an order. And it's certainly not that simple, but to that exaggeration, I think that's one of the elements that's pretty key. The communication across teams, and as well as from the executive teams all the way down. There was a CEO that came in and spoke a couple years back, and he was the CEO of a big name brand company that was taking on Cisco and just before the .com, and they were the face. They were the face of the collapse. I think there was stock dating issues, but one of the stories that he told that latched onto is this concept of a bullwhip, which is what he regretted was he was trying to take every 6 months and trying to consume more data and make iterations in their plan. And what he thought were slight tweaks in the plan, just waiting for new information so that they continually kind of shift, it became this bullwhip effect. So that, yeah, sure, the handle was just tweaking a little bit, but the very end of that bullwhip was flying all over the place, and the rest of his organization wasn't able to hold on. And that's that idea that, yeah, you can tweak things as you go, and you absolutely should. There's no one way to do stuff. But how do you think about, let's make a plan for this year? Let's make a big 3 bet. No more big three items. Let's focus on that. Everyone prioritizes on that. We're not going to come at you in 3 months and tell you to change. Those are the type of things I think organizations are just getting crushed at. And one of the things I hear from individuals is that they're complaining about, like, I thought I had a plan and then it all changed and I'm doing something different and I don't know why. So the element of change management and communication and alignment, I think those three things above anything else, above doing anything better in the go-to-market side of things, you can become such a much better organization by focusing on things that oftentimes are overlooked because it's too simple. We got to do something really intricate. No, it's back to basics. It's fundamentals.
Fundamentals, so important. And I look back at, my time at Outreach, and the 4 years we were crushing, but the tougher quarters we had, or the even like tougher years, it was when we got away from the big three bets and we made too many changes across the AE org, or, spinning up a new account manager. There was just too much change, and it led to a lot of frustration, a lot of confusion. And it is a delicate balance because you're getting new information in, throughout the year. There's this temptation to use that data to make all these like tweaks and refinements. But if you do that too much, you leave your workforce, confused, frustrated, and they don't know the target that they're shooting for anymore. And that can be super detrimental to culture. But tying back to what you said, so I love this Four Horsemen of Notre Dame analogy. And you mentioned that they were all, fairly interchangeable. One knew what the other one was doing, and you could slot them in. And that goes back to this concept of sort of a generalist specialist. And you're seeing this as a new skill set emerging across tech. Walk me through some of your thoughts there. And then maybe a second part of the question is, how can we empower our teams to start thinking more that way? Because we all have our KPIs, we all have our monthly, quarterly goals to hit. How do I create space for people to look at the whole picture?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a question not enough organizations are asking themselves or asking their employees. The concept of that generalist specialist, or it's also been called a polymath. It kind of came into fruition. It's something I've felt, and I think through my role is what I felt my role should serve as. A couple years back, I connected with another fellow Bay Area, a person called named Casey Wu, and Operations Guild, and we gelled immediately around that sort of concept that there's this, in sports they call it an athlete, but it's even more so than just an athlete. It's a CFO that understands the other parts of their business and how their decisions roll into everything else. The interesting element of that for strategy and ops folks is that we don't have a separate organization, separate KPIs to focus on. Like, our value to the business is this generalist specialist, this ability. And I'm not sure if it's generalist specialist or specialist generalist, but I'll figure that out. But the idea being is thinking through all the things to make sure that we're making decisions that are good for the business. I don't have any other goals outside of the top three of revenue growth, retention, and efficiency, which are the things investors would look at. And so putting that GM hat and wearing that GM hat, I'm diving into all sorts of various things. And it's not just me, it's folks on my team. It's other folks that are doing this sort of sort of program. And it's not just ops folks either, but it's the idea. I think Sam Altman brought it up where he's calling the polymath of, like, founders have to be this polymath thing, early startups, because you have to understand all the elements to be successful and continue on that approach. So that's one of the areas that I think is really fascinating. And it's tough when you think about it in an organization. What are the types of things that you need to have in your business? You need to have engineering, you need to have sales, right? You need to have all these specific roles that fill their function. And I think what's overlooked a little bit, and maybe what rests solely on the shoulders of the CEO or the president, is this concept of this polymath, of somebody that needs to have an understanding of the full business and can jump in. And certainly CEOs have to be able to do that very well. But if they're the only people in their organization doing that, I think that's a recipe for disaster. So certainly other folks in leadership need to have that element, but they also need to be encouraged. And the question you posed is, how do you encourage that within a group? Whenever I meet a team or bring somebody on, my mantra and what I will always talk about is that I want everyone to dedicate 25 to 30% of their time, which is an awful loud amount of time, to focus on things that nobody else is asking for. I'm hiring people that are really good at something. They're really good at whatever their role is. So if you're truly better than anybody else in the business thinking about that, innovate with it. Think about the things, and the way I also describe it is in your next job interview, when you're talking about the things you did at this current job, what are the things you're going to talk? What are the three things that you're going to talk about? The initiatives that you thought of, that you put into play, that you tested, that you rolled out, that executed and resulted in this. You're not going to talk about your day-to-day stuff, which is really important and sometimes not that much fun to deal with. And so the ways you need to address that is through these creative outlets of like, what are the things that really move the needle? And I think people get caught up in all this stuff and they have to do stuff. And you know what, you're going to bed at night, you wake up, those problems are still going to be there, right? You're never going to finish your to-do list. So if you carve out time to think what's really important, and it can't be 30 minutes here and there, like you have to separate things out, clear your mind, go for a run, go for a walk, get outside, clear your mind, start thinking about like what's really important. What are we really trying to do here? And is there something that I can contribute? And I think that's it. It's on the onus of everybody. But I think a lot of people really want that opportunity. I just don't know if they're given that call or that respite to be able to say, you know what, I'm asking you for a million things today, but I know I still want you to carve out that time to focus on those really important initiatives. And that's it. It's time. It's ultimately everyone's feeling the pinch, particularly the last couple of years with layoffs at companies. Everyone feels like they have more to do or more to take on. Think what's really important. Like, what's the most important thing you can do that day and prioritize them. Every morning you wake up, prioritize that stuff. And if there isn't something that's really game changing in your prioritization list, you're doing something wrong. And I think you're missing out on an opportunity and an obligation that you have to yourself and the company that you're working with to, showcase something, right? Build something great.
I really like that framing around, thinking about what you're going to put on your resume. Like, what are those big initiatives that we took, efficiency from X to Y because of this process I rolled out. Those are the things you're going to be super proud of. And the other thing, folks listening might be like, well, I don't have an extra 25, 30%. I'm already drowning. Like, I'm feeling burnt out. They ask so much of me. But at least in my experience, burnout for me usually comes from when I'm working on things that I'm not inspired by, right? And I'm kind of just going through the motions versus if you feel empowered and ownership over this new process system framework that you're rolling out, at least in my experience, that fills your cup up. That's not detracting, from your overall energy. So I think that's right. Is creating that kind of culture of, experimentation, true ownership. It's huge. So in reality, so you asked for folks 25, 30% on these big frameworks. Will you set up meetings to encourage that? Or like, how does that actually get rolled out in reality? And is this everyone from like an account executive to like a demand gen person? How do you think about actually making those happening and getting them support and maybe like cross-functional buy-in?
Yeah, and I think it does vary in terms of what you have access to and what you can do, but I think it applies to everybody. I mean, there is, I've never heard an AE not have something to say, not have an opinion. All right, well, great. Lean forward into that opinion, and let's build something. Let's do something about that, right? If you're the resident expert in this and whatever this is you're challenging, then lean in and let's do something. And I think that's it. Where it's like, oh, I'm just, are you in an organization where you have that opportunity, or you just, I'm gonna submit a ticket and somebody hopefully looks at it and does something. But yeah, I think it's the onus. And honestly, particularly for my teams, I want to hire folks. I want folks in seat that that challenge me. I'm not, I, you know, I don't want somebody that I know more than. I don't want to be over somebody's shoulder telling them what to do differently. No, that's not the purpose of hiring folks. Like, I'll go back to like a coaching analogy. I coached soccer earlier in my days, and like, I want people out there that are going to be like, here's the framework, but then go out there and crush it and do what you do, which is like something that nobody else can do or very few people can do in the organization. And that's I think your responsibility is to come up with those things and drive those things and lean forward into them. because I don't know, like anybody can go work in any company, right? Nothing's tying it down. So like make the most of it, right? Let's really get into it and do something really fun and exciting. And I think you need an organization that supports that. You need a manager that supports that. They need to understand the things, but that's the element. You want to create a culture of that, and I think that's the stuff that's really cool, right? Let's make it fun, and also I think it's not even just the fun element, but I think those are the really empowering projects that turn and elevate people's careers and help them in that career progression in terms of what they want to do and deliver. And that element too, and that coaching aspect of like, I want to, everyone says like, I want to go work for my team one day. Yeah, absolutely. Like if they're not growing and becoming better than me, then I'm not doing my job. And I'm serving myself. I'm not serving others. And you're one leader with a team, no matter how big that is. They're more in size than you. So that's where you can actually get the best results from.
Kudos to that leadership style. You said two things there. I want to work for my team one day. I think that's a great way to look at it. And then I don't want someone that I know more than. You want to hire people that fill the gaps on your team, your personal gaps, your business unit gaps, and kind of just unleash them and see what they can do. That's awesome. All right, I want to quickly shift gears a little bit. This is a story-based podcast. I think what's unique in your career is we interview a lot of tech execs, but not many make it into the world of investment banking. That's not typically the first career choice. So let's jump in a time machine, take you back to that period of your life. How did you even end up there? What happened?
It's a really great question. So I at one point, so I realized I didn't want to become a head of sales and head of marketing earlier on, but I there was something there, and I didn't know what exactly it was yet. And so I went back to grad school. I was 30, so a little bit older than most, and after working in the real world, grad school is kind of like summer camp in a way. No matter how hard your school is, it's not that hard. Like the reality is it's not that hard. So I went back there with this idea of like, I just really want to learn from a bunch of the classmates, understand what they're going through, just broaden that base of foundational knowledge and experience by osmosis through the rest of the crew. And very early on, I turned, like grad schools, it's a machine for getting your next job. So I think like a month into it, they start bringing companies in, and and they get out there on stage and they talk about what they're doing. They're trying to entice you, and you go into like resumes and all that stuff. And I remember the investment banking one came down. And I was sitting there with some friends, and we went in and watched it. And on one end there was this just pasty white, red-eyed analyst that probably had gained 30 pounds in the last 6 months, just not having any fun at all. And then it gradually went up the chain. And then there was this managing director, and just could have been more bronze, just hair just perfectly coiffed right there. And I'm looking at this thing going, this is the stupidest model I've ever seen. Like, how is this still a thing? Like, it doesn't make sense. I get the ideas behind some of the fundamentals, but I'm like, this is all, I'll bet $1 million I don't ever go out for that thing. And it turned out there were some alumni in the organization that worked, that I knew and I met. And they're like, hey, you got a sales background. Banking's kind of like sales. It's 90% sales. What they didn't tell me was that's what a managing director's life is, not what anybody under a managing director's life is. So I got thrown in. I actually got, I didn't have a finance background. I was really looking forward to boot camp, got into boot camp that first for the summer, got called on a project like 2 hours into it. So I missed training, which would have been really valuable for me at that time because I really needed it and I had to catch up on my own. So I got into this thing, and it was M&A, and it was 2007, and it was so interesting. Like despite the aura of investment banking and all the things that it does right or wrong, it's really interesting. Like you are at the center of what's happening in a lot of organizations, particularly in the M&A. We had a restructuring business that got really, really popular a year later when everything collapsed. And so doing that for a number of years, like it was really interesting. What you had to do on a daily basis, or looking at my BlackBerry at 5 p.m. on a Friday and seeing that little red light, knowing that, no matter what plans I had for the weekend were blown, like that part was bad. Like I clocked 120 hours one week, which you're doing the math and like, that's just insane. But what you learn is really, really foundational. You learn how to look at organizations. You look how to understand data modeling. I go through every time now, and I still do it where I create my own models just to validate, because it's um, there's this element of God, who's the Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I'm trying to think of the Judge Reinhold has this line where he's like, "I'll serve no fries before their time." Right? He dumps them out at his shop. Like, the element is like, you don't take anybody's model for your own, right? You need to make sure you understand the fundamentals, that it's correct. And I think there's another element within banking, which is when you put together and you put forward a product, you've checked it 3 times. You've had somebody else check it 3 times. Like, you are confident in your work. And I really respect the element that it's going to be right. Every now and then something slips through, but it's correct. And I have that expectations of my team. Like, if you send me something without validating it, shame on you. Like that, like that's the element there. But again, one of those, the big takeaways that I feel helps, particularly in the world of data and business, is that element. And I've said this probably a million times, but you build a model to defend an answer. You don't start with a question and build a model to find the answer. There's always an answer that they're looking for, and it's just, how do you support it? And if you have that mindset in place, then anytime you look at a chart or whatever else there is, you're going to look at that and be like, okay, all right, are you trying to sell me something with this data, or is there truly something in here that you're agnostic and you're putting it forward? And I think for my role, I've taken that in, like, whether the data is good or bad, this is the data, and this is the way it should be presented in terms of the light. We could cut it different ways, but I think that might be misleading. And ultimately, I think that's the power. Is it the right information getting to folks in the right place? Because there's certainly a lot of data, but then how do you take that data and understand what's the story behind it? What's happening? What should we do about it? And that's what a lot of the job is that interpreting what's happening, the trends, and connecting the dots across the business. And so, I mean, I'm super thankful. I absolutely believe that I couldn't have gotten to where I was as effectively or maybe as quickly without that baseline of understanding. And you could certainly learn on your own. I know a bunch of folks that have done it. Speaking of Udemy, have like gone and done all those things on their own, and right, you can do that on your own. But that was just that was an empowering moment. Not only of how quickly I wanted to leave that world, because I felt like I wasn't building, I wasn't producing, I was a middleman, which great, very lucrative. The other thing actually I would say is there's another element to that lifestyle that I picked up, which is every year is really evaluating your life, what's happening in your career, where you're going, are you going in the right direction? And that certainly came after bonus time. Like, after you get your check, you're like, okay, do I want to do this again another year? Or is like, there's something different? And I think it's really important for that self-reflection and thought of, is this where you're going? Where do you need to get to? How do you make those steps out of there? And so where I eventually left and got back into tech, and thankfully found a boss who had a banking background like myself and respected that sort of environment, where I think most of my peers have consultancy backgrounds. That to me has just been like a really great thing to lean on. But man, it's a tough world. And I still have some friends that are still going through that, and they love it. And God bless them, because somebody's got to love it. But for me, it was one of those things where I would have lost $1,000,000 on that bet. But I'm really glad that I went into it, because it's one of those things where it's like, gain experience where you can. Don't be closed-minded in those elements. Be open for things that you maybe didn't think about previously. But that one to me, it was a blur. Very, very, very few hours of sleep in those few years, but a really great experience at the
I
end.
imagine you also just learned what the human brain and body is capable of. Like we all work hard in tech, but I don't see too many execs clocking 120-hour work weeks, And so talk about summer camp. I feel like, I don't know you work hard, but going from that back into tech, you're like, oh, this isn't so bad, I'm doing my, 70-hour work weeks, whatever it may be, is going to look like childhood.
A real funny story real quick on that, which is it was one of my first months, I think, at Salesforce. And we were in a meeting, and an analyst put together this model, and they're talking about stuff. And there was a couple SVPs in the room back then, the original OG of Salesforce. And there was an obvious error in the model that everyone started kind of picking up on. And I was like, this is going to be an interesting situation. Like, what's the call on this? and the senior leader in the room just said, "Time out, everyone. I think there's something wrong in this element. Let's take a moment. Let's all figure it out together." And it was like, that is such a refreshing point of view. Like that is so awesome because that would have not gone that direction in my prior career. So the fact that people were like, no, listen, you made a mistake. I get it. Like, let's go through and we're all here, all the folks that are stakeholders, we can all figure this out together. And I was like, that is really cool. And I made the right move because that sort of culture is just like, yeah, that's cool. And that's what made those OGs at Salesforce the OGs, because those folks were incredible.
Yeah. How would that have gone in the investment banking world? Had there
Yeah,
been
not
a
not
flaw
not
in
well,
the
no,
model?
that would have been that would have been a disaster, career-wise and in the moment, all of the things that you can think about.
It feels like in the banking, it's like perfection over speed. And then I think speed over perfection in tech is usually kind of what we value more. And then,
Yeah,
you know,
directional accuracy versus there is no one right answer. It's algebraic. There's no one way to solve it. The answer is always moving. It's an algorithmic model that you're trying to figure out how the trends are. And so even if you are perfect, you've probably gone too far. It's probably a sign that you've done something wrong because you've probably omitted something else. And that perfectness is momentary because things are shifting, things are developing, evolving, and so it's the idea about this directionally accurate North Star that people can rally around.
how is, because I've certainly seen this again and again in tech, and I'm sure coming from investment banking and then back into tech is, you know, you can use the data to tell just about any story you want, and you can use it, you know, you can weaponize data to come with what could be a false assumption sometimes, but if you, all you have to do is maybe uh, look at it from a slightly different lens, omit a few things. How have you kept yourself and your teams honest and looked at data objectively when sometimes it doesn't tell you what you want it to?
One of the areas that has been critical, I think, in strategy and ops, there's kind of three pillars in our world, which is there's the strategy planning side. What is the go-to-market like? What does our product look like in 24 and 25? There's the execution element. There's all the operational efficiencies that include systems and processes and what happens today. The third arm is the analytics arm, and that is so critical that there is the source of truth, and it's that is a nirvana state for that single source of truth. Because even if you take the same system and you have it calculate the exact same calculation, it will differ because of some weird element in timing or the fact that it's past midnight where it's being calculated, and all these things can happen that I feel like from the perspective of, is the data telling us you've got to be very open and willing to say, hey, listen, the emperor's wearing no clothes, like this is a disaster, and be able to have the air cover to be able to have those conversations. And I think that's not just I think that's a mandate. Like if we're saying everything's rosy, if your ops person is like, no, this is great, Captain, we're doing great. Like there's something that you're missing. Because there's always something out there. Maybe you're just not looking far enough into the future, or in different parts of the business. There's always going to be something good, but there's always something that you can improve on. And that's that kind of balance. Is what does that look like? Is it, how early do you want to sound the alarms? Is it something that you feel is systemic? Like how do you chop up bi-weekly? Do you look at stuff weekly? Is it a data point that isn't relevant weekly? Like, does it fluctuate so much that you can't get there? So the problem that most organizations have, particularly the startups, is their data is so volatile, and the fact that there just isn't materially enough of it to make an honest conclusion. And so the challenge is trying to sift through and understand kind of the five whys behind the data points. And that's really difficult. But I also feel like that's an element of the job in ops, which is you're taking that data and then what's the story behind it? And what's the options? Like this story is giving us like potential three options out there. My recommendation or our recommendation or your recommendation is A. And then it's ultimately if the leader comes in and says, you know what, I get it. I understand why you're saying A, but I'm willing to say, let's go C, see how, whatever that is. It's the idea that you're having conversations that are prescriptive, through that, and that you're coming with an element of opinion, of a point of view, and that passion. And I would say, beyond all things, when I'm looking to hire folks or I'm looking at my team, if you're not passionate about the role that you're in and really wanting to do that, I think that's a challenge, because like this isn't like a fun thing every day. Like, work is work. Like, nobody, there's a handful of people in the world that, like, every day they get up and they make snow cones on the beach in Costa Rica, and they're like, everything about their life is great, right? The challenge being is that there's stuff that's just difficult, whatever it is. And so, like, what's your point of view? What's your perspective? You've got to have a perspective in your role. Like, that's critical. You can't be an expert in something and not have a point of view.
Come with a perspective, be prescriptive, ask the 5 whys of the data, build the story behind it, test, iterate, make a hypothesis, and you could be wrong 10 times, but
It's
it's
not
about
one and done. Okay, let's go back and look at this stuff. Like, there's no, you don't just put stuff on a shelf and move on. It's like, what are the things you're going to look at on a regular basis? And maybe this new symptom or this alert or whatever it is has come up. Maybe that's something that you're going to monitor for a while, right? Then maybe that's in your dashboard that you're reviewing on a daily basis. Whatever it is, right? There's nothing one and done. Like, the worst thing people can do is like, oh, we're going to launch this program. All right, hope that's good. We're going to go launch a new program, right? It's that element of constant enablement, evaluation. We had forgot the group that it's called, the name of the group, but they're a bunch of ex Top Gun pilots from all around the world, and they all talk about the debrief. The most important part of their day, their mission, is that debrief. They put all their patches on the table. There is no hierarchy. It's anyone can say whatever they want, and that piece. And I think people move so fast that we missed the debrief. What did we learn about this? What can we do differently? And I myself struggle sometimes. I forget to do it, but man, there's one thing that I really do believe in. It's that, like, okay, we just did something. What did we learn? What did we do different? What's the takeaway out of this? Which is so important. And that was so tough to get to. But I think that's a really important element.
it definitely does not happen enough in tech. Is that debrief. Everyone has shiny object syndrome. On to the next thing, on to the next experiment, on to the next challenge. But debrief, yeah, couldn't underscore more how important that is. Deal by deal, test by test, experiment by experiment. I think that spending time debriefing is always a good use of time. But this kind of flows nicely into a listener question, and this one's fairly tactical, and will help folks kind of diagnose where they should be spending their time. The question is: we're an early stage company, and I'm trying to simplify org-wide reporting. Noble mission can be difficult. What are the must-haves in a CEO executive rollout dashboard? In the simplest terms, what do you think should be on exec rollup dashboard?
Yeah, and this is a tough one because it's so difficult to put all the things in a dashboard that covers it all. But I think you need to have the pulse on the business. So number one on there is going to be the pipeline health. It is not a single number. It's a number that spans across the different geographies or the segments that you're currently focusing on. And honestly, if I were to design that CEO dashboard, I would take a step back. On the go-to-market side, there would be probably one number to start, 3 numbers to start with. What our current prediction for this quarter is, what our prediction for next quarter is, and our prediction for the quarter after that. And that's a total bookings and churn number. So it's this weird made-up number, but it's the element of, like, how are we thinking about the life of our business from the tip of the spear, so to speak, with the customers. Clicking into that, I think pipeline health is the one thing in a company everybody can rally around. Every single department in an organization can impact pipeline. So therefore, that's the best indicator for future results. So I really like the attention on pipeline. Certainly the forecasting element of, like, where are we tracking? And then I also like for the future, what are we looking at for our renewals and retention numbers? Who are the customers out there? It's that go-to-market view of booking, pipeline bookings, and retention across the board. And then I would also like to leave, because I think one element that always gets left out is product. And it's really weird, and I don't know why that's the case, but there's always, like, ops for marketing and sales and CS and all the rest, but, like, ops is supposed to be on its own and get information from marketing or something. So I love the idea of having that, like, here are the top priorities, here's our roadmap. Here's how we're tracking against those things. Because what the go-to-market organization needs to be doing is focused on selling and messaging the things that are out next year. It's the vision that are out next year. I can't tell you how many times I've heard a feature function pitch from a vendor or somebody else. I'm like, I don't care. In fact, I've got to the point now where and this is, sorry, a little diatribe here, but I literally, I don't want the sales pitch. I want the VC pitch. I want your fundraising pitch. Tell me about what's happening out there. And actually, a few peers and I, we used to get on a monthly basis, we used to get some founders every month to kind of hear that, because we're not going to listen to a sales pitch. And I don't care about that, but tell me what the vision is, establish that. So I think internally on that CEO's dashboard is like, are we mapping to the vision? And if you can look at how we're doing by pipeline, how we're tracking by our product initiatives, how we're doing with our current quarter, is that mapping up? How are we looking at for future quarters in pipeline? And then also the retention element. Like, do we feel like there's risks in the business? And can I triangulate any meaningful insight from the three? Is it because of a certain product? Is there a regional impact? Is it a team issue? So that ability to go, the way that I love dashboards is I hate a lot of dashboards. I don't like pie charts and things like that. I like things that are either trending over time or peer related. So I want to see across all the reps in this segment, or I want to see all the segments aligned. And then I want to see it over time. Because is it unique to this quarter? Is it unique to this quarter year over year? Is it unique to certain folks, or some people get it and some people don't? And there's a question, actually, this brings up one more point where there's an element that I've asked oftentimes when I've gone and interviewed at companies, which is, would you rather be 120% of your number, but on the backs of 30% of your reps? Or would you rather be at 95% of your number, but have 80% of your reps contribute? And it's hopefully the latter. Like that's the goal. And so, yeah, you could crush it, but if it's not across the organization, it's not sustainable, right? You're opening yourselves up to that risk of few folks leaving, few folks failing, and you're in a tough spot you can't recover from. So it's the idea around, do certain folks get it and other folks don't? Is it something where it's systemic across the board where nobody gets it and like we're in real trouble? That's the element. That's where you're trying to look at. And I feel like, one more point on this, I see so few dashboards coming from vendors that I think really matter. In fact, there is no vendor out there today that's managing the day-to-day of a rep. Here's what my territory looks like. Here's my heat map. Here's my pipeline. Here's my booking. Everyone has their different elements and everyone's trying to be the real estate for the eyes of the rep, but most of it fails and goes to ops or managers. But man, if there's something that you could build that's like the eyes of like what a rep can do next, translate that back into an exec dashboard, you are the stickiest vendor in the world and you're never getting replaced. That's my take. And I've yet to find that. And I've pushed all of our vendors really, really hard because I don't feel like anybody's quite got that. People are circling. And I think that's probably that pipeline management component is going to be what comes out there next.
Yeah, I think everyone is trying to drive towards that, but yeah, we're certainly not there yet. One thing I want to highlight there was the idea with product. If I want the VC pitch, not the sales pitch, that resonated with me. I like that. If like the sales pitch, it's too easy to be like, hey, here's the problem, we're solving feature functionality, and that's what you push out and enable the org with, instead of, this is why we're doing it at a company-wide level. Here's the vision. Here's what it's going to allow us to do 3 to 5 years in the future, and get people excited and bought into that version versus just, the immediate.
Partnering with the vendor, you're not partnering with their product, right? It's what do you need it to be? Are you going to help contribute to it? Do you agree with their vision on the world?
All right. Noah, this has been awesome. Thank you for the time today. I got 2 more questions as we wrap up, and then we'll get you back to the beach here. So first question is, what is one tactic or strategy, widely held belief, that you believe is bullshit or no longer serving us, that revenue leaders today still?
I mostly hear this from CFOs in the world, and I agree wholeheartedly. There is no snowflake out. There's no matter how unique or different you think your business, your segment is, it's not. There are certainly elements that we have to address and align to, but we can't build something that addresses every nuanced case. And there hasn't been a time when I've had to dig into a snowflake situation. And I'm like, you know what? 80, 90% of this is pretty similar. Like we can touch on these other things up here, but fundamentally, We need to operate as a business. And I think when you start getting too isolated and like my business and my unit and that we're all different, you lose the scale of an organization. You lose the power of being a big company. It then just becomes, I'm a small little, snowflake, but the rest of the business isn't moving as fast to support me because it just can't. You can't do those one-offs. And so it's Salesforce did pretty well, providing 70% of the solution that companies needed. Now there's a lot of data, other things behind that, but that's the kind of idea. Like, don't overcomplicate it. Like, back to basics, fundamentals. Just get away from this notion, and you will be served better.
Seems like the recurring theme in this is, back to basics. I think we can all need that right now in this sort of new efficiency area. Go back to what got us here. All right. The last question is a similar one, but flipped in a more positive light. I know you're in a new role, so it might be tougher to answer this one, but what's one tactic or strategy that's been working for you or any of the partners that you work with?
Yeah. So I can't credit this person, but I did steal this from somebody who put it so eloquently on a whiteboard recently, which is PUTFP. Pick up the effing phone. There is no replacement for just having a conversation with somebody. If you're indenting paragraphs in Slack, you've gone delete everything. Just delete it. Just control delete it. Pick up the phone. Like, this whole thing of just cluttering inboxes and electronic channels. It's just, you can't. It's so inefficient. And then you're just like, okay, I'm just going to do all this stuff and then I'm going to throw up on your plate and it's on you now. No, just pick up the phone, having a 5-minute conversation, all solved, no electronic media needed, right? It's done. Like, that's it. End of story. Just pick up the phone.
Couldn't resonate with that more. I literally did that last Thursday. I was like, I'm writing 2 paragraphs in Slack and my VP of marketing sits about 10 meters away from me. Not even just pick up the phone, just get out of your desk and go fucking talk to them. So yeah, pick up the phone, get mobile if you're in an office. Makes a world of difference, and the ability to articulate the outcome you're driving towards so much faster, more efficiently, whether that's internally or externally as well. I love that. Well, Noah, thank you again, man. I really appreciate you jumping on. I know you're in the thick of it right now, but best of luck as you execute against your 30, 60, 90-day plan. I'm sure you'll kill it. Excited to see what you're able to do at Diligent.
Thanks, Scott. Really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Beautiful. Last thing, after listening to this, I'm sure many people would like to work for a leader like yourself. Are you hiring any key roles right now you want to highlight?
I'm going to be hiring a lot of roles, just kind of digging into what's needed there. But if you have interest, reach out. Please reach out. Still formulating what that plan looks like, but please reach out. All areas: marketing, customer success, sales background, in terms of operations, strategy focus, and preferably folks that have combinations of those to see across all the different spectrums of the go-to-market.
Beautiful. Well, to all our listeners, thanks for hanging out with us. I always say it, but listening is one thing. Executing is totally different. Take some of these ideas, concept stories, look internally at your business, try and apply some of them. And we will see you next week.